Okay, it's time to talk the stay stitching, which is step number 16. And remember, this is the one that I said I wanted you to skip ahead and do after we just finished with step number 7. I think we're ready for step 8 to start to put on the sleeve bands. And I haven't put those on yet. Here's the end of a sleeve and my other sleeve. So we want to skip over to 16 before we do the sleeve bands, before we do the hemband, and before we do the zipper. One thing I want to point out here is reading and looking at the picture. And if you look right here on this edge here, that edge, this thread indicates that stitching. There is a stitch line that goes here and there without a thread. And what that means is the zipper is sewn in there. But number 15 is finishing off the zipper. I wanted you to go ahead and do 16 first. So that is a clue that, oh, they did it then. I'm telling you to not do it then. And I want to explain why again. On my video, you'll see me actually stitching it here in just a moment. But in the module, there is also a sheet from sewing.org, some information about what stay stitching is in general. And what they've shown you in the picture, which is much neater than me trying to get this all laid out flat here now, is this is our neckline. I haven't put that zipper in. This is our center fronts over here, and there's no zipper there yet, right? And their thread looks like it starts one and goes around and ends there. There's no break in the thread. Of all of the choices to do stay stitching, this is the poorest choice. On the sewing.org sheet, it shows you how it's really broken up, depending on if it's a front or a back. And stay stitching, you want to do it towards the center is what should really happen. So on the sewing.org, they would be coming in here at this dart. Your dart here is your shoulder seam. And they would go from here to the front, and then they'd come over here and go from the same shoulder dart to the front. And then they would take and come the opposite way from that dart to the center back. And there's, I've got my little center back marked, right, with the little V. And then they come from this one over to there. I don't think in this particular instance, I mean, that is one way to do it. I'm just going to have you stitch from here to the center, and then from here to the center. Or you could do it opposite. You could start back here and stitch out, come back and stitch out. Why we put stay stitching in is so we don't continue to stretch this out. It's a very tender area, you might say, and it could get really stretched again in handling it for the sleeve bands, handling it for the zipper. Maybe you're trying it on, and you made your decision how long or the arm depth. So this is something that should go in now. There's no need to wait. In fact, it's a bad choice to wait. And whether you put it in going from here to the center back or starting at the center back and going to the front, either way is correct. There's just one, as I said. Sorry, excuse me. There is just one way that is highly suggested not, and that's to go around it. Because you can imagine if you started here and started stitching, you are going to be pushing this one, you're pushing this direction towards the back. And if you kept going, now you're going to push this one out towards the front. So your stretching can actually, it could actually stretch in putting in the stay stitch that's supposed to keep it from stretching. Now, where does it go? The general rule is 1/8 of an inch away from the seam line in the seam allowance. So this is 5/8 inch seam allowance here that we're going to be using. Nothing new on that. And our, get my little gauge here. Okay, got my gauge now. And so it's if it's 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, we want it to be 1/8 of an inch away from that, and that's taking one away, 1/8 over there, means it's like a 1/2 inch. That's at a 1/2 inch. 4/8 is a 1/2 inch. So therefore, it would be there. So we're going to stitch a 1/2 inch away from this edge. Don't cross over that 5/8 inch. You will find some people who put it out here in a 1/4 inch away from the edge, but that's not really keeping where you want it as close comfortably to the stitch line to help protect where you're actually going to stitch. Because if you stitch out in here and you're going to stitch permanently there, you still have movement in here, right? So what size of stitch and what kind of stitch? This should not be a straight stitch. This should now be your regular straight stitch. It should not be a stretch stitch. It should be a straight stitch. And so we're going to stitch at a 1/2 inch, our regular straight stitching. And remember, this is only going to be through one thickness. So it is wise not to be doing any kind of extra fancy movement in your stitch, which is another reason why don't use a stretch stitch. The rule most people will say, use your regular size stitch or slightly less. I like to use a little bit less. On a knit though, you need to be careful that you're not, bunching it up too tight. So where my average size is around a 3 on that I've been doing, that's what I've been stitching with for my wobble or so. So I'm going to make it actually a straight stitch of like 2 and see what that does here. Okay, so I'm ready to go over to the machine and we're going to stitch it in.